Afternoon. Good afternoon, Teresa.
Hi, Willard. Hope you are
How are
well.
you? I'm good. How are you?
Good. Did you have
I
a good return from Barcelona?
perfect. I had the
Hi, everyone.
perfect
Sorry, we're about
weekend,
to
and yeah, I've rested, I think.
Very good. Very good.
I won't ask you. It was a 10 minutes flight.
No, I actually went during the weekend to Lisbon.
Hi,
so-
Teresa. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Teresa. We're about to
Hi everyone.
Hi, everyone. I don't see all the faces, but the few faces that are there, I think, are all well known.
Hi everyone. Hi.
Hi, Davine. Hi, Teresa. Can you hear me okay on the Zoom?
Yes, Charlie, we can hear you.
Perfect. About to get started here. Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay.
Great. Thanks for joining, everybody. I think we're going to get started because we've got a good crowd, at least on the online call. I know the Friday afternoon starting slot is a bit of a challenge for in-person attendance, but really appreciate you joining and hoping we'll have a few more coming through from lunch very soon. So thanks, everybody, for joining this CFS Consumer World Food Security side event on fair food prices, unlocking action for inclusive and competitive markets. I'll be your moderator. My name's Charlie Worthington. I am Food Systems Lead at Consumers International, the membership organization for more than 200 consumer groups in over 100 countries worldwide. We've got a really great panel here next to me today with a couple of virtual special guests as well. The panel offering expertise from around the world, both international organizations working on this important issue, and also representatives of some of the communities who are bearing the burden of unfair food prices. A couple of technical points to start with. We have interpretation available in French. So for those on the Zoom or in the meeting, feel free to use this. Additionally, we've got a good window of time allocated at the end for interventions from the audience, either here or on Zoom, in keeping with the CFS's tradition of inclusive discussion and promoting different voices. So very keen to hear questions, interventions from the floor on this issue towards the end of the session. And those joining online, please do feel free to put any questions or burning contributions you'd like to make into the chat. And we're going to be a bit tight for time, so I've warned our panelists that I'll be a little ruthless in keeping us on time, and same will go for interventions. So just to keep my own introduction very quick, I want to explain a bit about what we mean by fair food prices and why this needs to be on our agenda, on the CFS's agenda. So first of all, this is the FAO's Global Food Price Index, tracking food commodity prices on international markets. The data since the start of 2022, prices were at an all-time high in light of COVID-19, conflict, climate crisis. Yet since that peak in March 2022, prices have been steadily declining ever since. Yet in just about every country around the world, consumer level prices are still rising, often rapidly. As we all know, farmers around the world, especially small-scale farmers, are very rarely receiving a fair livelihood for the food they produce, even when prices surge. There are various reasons why consumer prices are rising while commodity prices fall. It can take time for equilibrium to restore after shocks. Energy costs are still high. The impact of climate crisis is only getting worse. But consumer prices pretty much never go down. And indeed, we can't ignore the widely recognized reality that many food companies, both national and multinational, registered record profits in the wake of this food price crisis. To suggest that our overconcentrated and often uncompetitive food systems are a driver of unfair food prices is no longer a minority position. We hear it mentioned frequently in the CFS yesterday, the session on price volatility, still not frequently enough, but really getting onto that agenda. And we can see this year alone, it's been diagnosed by, to name just a few, the International Monetary Fund, highlighting how rising corporate profits account for almost half the increase in Europe's inflation. The UN Conference on Trade and Development, one of our speakers today, highlighting that profiteering by corporations that control global food systems as part of the challenge in their recent 2023 Trade and Development reports, and by the White House, the US government, highlighting how corporate consolidation gives middlemen the power to squeeze both consumers and farmers, resulting in unfair prices. One final point from me before we hand over to the panel. A lot of the focus of these discussions has still largely been on Europe or North America, where the data on profits and prices is clearest. But what we at Consumers International are hearing from our members, from partners around the world, is that the problem is just as bad, if not more so, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, as we can see on this slide, where competition is often weakest and where this overconcentration is most dangerous. That's something we like panelists and audience members to bear in mind, now that, as we've seen, this problem has been so clearly diagnosed by so many actors. So today we can dig into some of the solutions, from trade and competition policy to food sovereignty and local food supply chains, that can help us to build a fairer food marketplace. So to get us started, we're going to hear from two speakers representing those stakeholders most affected by unfair food prices, food producers and consumers, to better understand how these groups are being affected. Our first speaker is Daveen Minaya, my colleague at Consumers International, based in Nairobi, Kenya, who's leading our work on this issue, partnering with consumer groups and competition authorities across Africa to build evidence and solutions for unfair food prices. Daveen, to kick off this conversation, can you briefly explain to us how unfair food prices are affecting consumers around the world?
Thank you, Charlie. And thanks for the fellow panelists and the participants joining. One of the reasons that, one of the ways that consumers have been affected by unfair food pricing, data has shown that over 3 billion people around the world are not able to afford healthy food. And again, data also from FAO has shown that over 193 million people across the world are still food insecure. That is as per 2021 statistics. And in 2022, we saw that number rising to about 258 million. And the same number is still growing. And this is an indication that consumers are disadvantaged by unfair food pricing. The second reason is that out of the 22 countries that have been mentioned as hunger hotspots by World Food Programme, 11 of these are in Africa, meaning that there's need for the continent, especially the global south, to take action and address the issues of unfair food pricing. Then again, if you look at how our food has been priced, especially in the African context, you will see that most of the pricing is actually way above beyond the global food price index. This is demonstrated by the fact that the prices are very high, irrespective of the fact that climate crisis is there, there's COVID-19 pandemic and the disrupted supply chain. But again, data is showing that dominant players are taking advantage of the situation and overpricing the food, especially in Africa. And again, there's a lot of power imbalances between the different actors and again, disadvantaging the consumer. Lastly, but not least, is to mention that we've seen most of the players within the food system making supernormal profits during the same period where the consumers are still disadvantaged by unfair food pricing and being taken advantage of and exposed to unhealthy food because of the current situation. So we see a situation where some players are making supernormal profits and thriving in their areas of control, while the consumers are being disadvantaged because of the exposure they have with this crisis. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much for that, Daveen. A really, really valuable intervention. Our next speaker is Laura Lorenzo, Director of the World Rural Forum, a network of family farming organizations representing more than 35 million family farmers around the world. Laura, we've heard about how consumers are being affected by unfair food prices as a result of market concentration and this imbalance of power. Could you introduce for us the situation facing farmers, especially small-scale family farmers?
Thank you, Charlie. It is my pleasure to collaborate with Consumers International, trying to bring in together the voices of farmers and family farmers and consumers. That I think is very important. I will try to introduce some of the reflections that came from farmers organizations, family farmers, especially small ones, no? First, I will say that we have seen that during the last 15 years, there is an intensive production and trade concentration of certain grains, feed, animal feed that has been stimulated. So we have seen that lots of cheap calories and more food is imported and is provoking or making unfair competition for family farmers in their own local markets. No, this is something very important and is impacting our farmers, family farmers. I need to underline that they sell their products in domestic and local markets. More than 80% of their crops are sold there. As a result, today only 4 crops. You will know that wheat, rice, maize, and soya bean provide 2/3 of human calories. And what is very important for us is that we are losing in our farms, we are losing the genetic diversity. No, 75 of it is lost already, and this will bring also some vulnerabilities to pests and diseases. No. We have a lot of pressures, farmers, as you will know, and we will demand during underline during the next COP. We have enormous pressure by climate state of emergency, I will say, economic crisis. So it is very, very difficult for small-scale farmers to produce, and the food insecurity is rising, as all of us knows. No, we wish to underline that family farmers are vital. No, that they can really, if they have the adequate policies, they can play a very vital role in promoting or in feeding the world. That is recognized by the UN Decade on Family Farming, because they can provide local, cultural, appropriate, fresh, healthy products in a very efficient, timely, inclusive, and sustainable way. However, access to market remains one of the main challenges faced by family farmers. They have problems, a lot of problems in this relation, but I wish to underline one that is the very difficult position while they negotiate with other stakeholders. They have a very unbalanced contracts and fair conditions in some cases. They have lack of power to interact in equal terms with other market intermediaries. So this can mean that they earn significantly less than other actors, such as larger processors, retailers, or exporters. No, I have here one example of some family farmers, coffee family farmers in Uganda, that were earning just 0.5% of the retail price to consumers in London. I think this is dramatic, no? In other cases, even in the north, in the global north, small-scale farmers like Spain, that I am from Spain, are forced in some cases to sell at prices below the cost of production. No, that and a specific regulation is trying to address this issue. So. In short, we do think that family farmers have the potential to adapt quickly to the new demands of the different consumers, particularly at local and regional levels. And but we need public policies to facilitate the integration of family farming into local and regional agri-food chains. We need to develop, for sure, better or regulate the trade policies, to review unfair competition, bringing the benefits of food production to for more vulnerable people. I will be delighted to hear the proposal that will came from the panel, from the experts, but I need to highlight some of the ideas that we have in mind, promoting regulatory frameworks that improve market transparency, monitoring contractual agreements that will empower family farming, promoting cooperatives, reducing food import dependence, and others. No, so it is my pleasure to give the back to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. And really great to hear that angle as well about kind of multiple dimensions of unfair prices for farmers, both in terms of prices received from the aggregators, but also thinking about what consumers pay and how to balance that with this challenge of access to food for consumers versus that need for a fair livelihood for farmers. We're going to move on to the next stage of our discussion, hearing from a number of experts who are joining us to share some more perspectives on some of these solutions that Laura highlighted. We're going to start with our two long distance panelists, hoping that the technology won't let us down. First up, joining from Geneva, Switzerland, is Teresa Morera, Head of Competition and Consumer Policies at UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, whose 2023 Trade and Development report I quoted at the start of this session, highlighting the challenge of corporate concentration as a potential driver of unfair food prices for producers and consumers. Teresa, could you please describe for us some of the actions required, especially at global level, to strengthen competition in this agri-food sector?
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, everybody. I think I will just start by sharing very few slides. Let me just try to see. I hope you are seeing them now.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Can you put them on full screen there? We've got it on.
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to thank you for the invitation, of course. You mentioned the Trade and Development report of UNCTAD, but I also wanted to just share very briefly some of the stats. Well, you also started with this, but that were developed since last year due to the impact of the war in Ukraine and the establishment of the United Nations Global Crisis Response Group focusing on food, finance, and food, energy, and finance for development. So, of course, this confirms what you mentioned regarding food prices, also concrete, important related food prices, of course, wheat and agriculture, but also fertilizers and rice. And I wanted to also highlight, because I think previous speakers already touched upon this. So I think, of course, we are talking about food. This has to be seen from the point of view of UNCTAD in the broader context, because, of course, we deal with all areas related with international trade and development. And our focus is to assist developing countries to better integrate the world economy. So we have gathered extraordinary expertise in the area of commodities. And I think some of the references from previous speakers on the commodity dependent countries and, well, the importance of the diversification is extremely relevant also for this debate. But let me get to, sorry, a very detailed final slide on the number of possible recommendations. But I wanted to tell you first the following. So, of course, when we are talking about unfair food prices or about food prices, we have to consider a very large agri-food chain, which, of course, encompasses seeds, crop protection, fertilizers, agricultural machinery, animal genetic improvement, food manufacturing, processing, retailed. And what we have been observing also, thanks to studies done by colleagues from the BRICS Competition International Trade Center, Competition Law and Policy Center, professors, scholars even from Africa. Professor Simon Roberts has written a number of articles on this issue, focusing, of course, on the African continent, is that there is remarkable market concentration in some of these stages of this long value chain. Then in some of these stages, market concentration is combined with intellectual property rights, which usually, of course, also restrict access or make access a little bit more difficult or more expensive. And I also wanted just to mention, talking about, let's say, the last stage near the consumer, the retail, the incredible buying power. So the market concentration that translates into buyer power of significant importance of a lot of retail companies, even in the most developed countries. So thinking of all of this, I gathered, well, a lot of briefs and recommendations of UNCTAD in different areas, because I do think that this needs to be put in a wider context of international trade and development. And you are looking at some of the recommendations. So of course, market access is very much connected to competition. The reduction of trade barriers and all trade costs coming from non-tariff barriers continues to be, I would say, a fight, a strong pledge within the remit of the World Trade Organization and any other free trade agreements that cover international trade. The appeal to countries to resist unjustified export restrictions, and unfortunately this was even seen this year in some EU Nordic countries vis-a-vis the Ukraine exports. Then when possible, the shift to regional chains, I think this is quite important for the African continent. And from an economic point of view, of course, diversification, UNCTAD, as others, have been recommended this for a long time. Of course, this is easier said than done, because this implies a medium to long-term planning, but to increase local production, also to diversify sources of imported foods. And of course, in times of crises like the COVID-19 pandemic or the negative impact of the Ukraine war, have reserves to ensure that hunger is not necessarily rising because of this. Of course, this implies also collaboration between countries and with international and regional organizations involved. But getting to competition, I wanted also to say that, of course, there are limits to what competition law and policy can do, but clearly competition law and policy can play a role here. First of all, with market studies, market monitoring, not only to identify bottlenecks and inefficient functioning of markets or in concrete companies, and being able or to launch strong law enforcement, or at the same time to advise governments on the enactment of regulatory measures. Merger control, I think, is increasingly becoming an important tool, because it really allows at least competition authorities to ensure that competition remains in markets. So if two big competitors in this long value chain want to merge, if this can be authorized, this should imply the sale of key assets so that markets remain open and competitive. And only exceptionally, and we saw this throughout the pandemic, due to the need to ensure the supply of key consumer goods, namely food staples, exemptions exceptionally granted by competition authorities to agreements between micro and small and medium-sized companies just trying to get supplies at reasonable prices. But Charlie, I just want to end with consumer protection, because of course, this is also our mandate. We also look at food, the food sector from this point of view. And I wanted to say that, of course, what comes out is a recommendation that we need to have food availability, affordability, and security. And the UN guidelines for consumer protection do recommend countries to follow FAO standards and WHO Codes Alimentarius. They recommend also consumer protection agencies to monitor markets in order to control all types of speculative behaviors that tend to flourish when in times of crisis, for obvious reasons, while at the same time having a proactive, positive action, trying to inform and educate consumers about all important issues regarding the food sector. I think I will stop now. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Teresa, for a really valuable intervention. Great to have UNCTAD represented here at CFS, obviously such a relevant mandate for that issue of food security. I think that long list of possible solutions you shared, definitely a testament to the value of what UNCTAD can bring to the conversation. Our next speaker, joining from Malawi, is Dr. Willard Mwemba, Chief Executive of the Competition Commission of COMESA, the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, a regional economic community representing 21 countries across Africa. And COMESA are really a leading voice for competition action specifically to tackle unfair prices in Africa. Dr. Mwemba, again, trying to keep it to 5 minutes, could you give us a quick overview of how regional and national competition action can help and is helping to deliver fair food prices?
Thank you very much, Charlie, and thank you very much to Teresa and Davini. I think some of the things that they've already mentioned are the things that we are doing. So I'm glad to see and hear that our approach is not unique and out of this world. It is something that probably is internationally accepted. What we are doing as COMESA, so that I'm within my 5 minutes, let me go straight to the point. As COMESA, we did identify that there is a problem. There is a problem of food prices. It became very evident to us that consumers and the majority of our population were becoming poorer and poorer. Our small-scale farmers were becoming poorer and poorer. But we observed that the big firms, multinationals, not that we're against multinationals, by the way, we need them, but there should be a certain standard of behavior that benefits everyone. So we recognized that the multinationals that were dealing with the consumers and also dealing with the producers, like the small-scale farmers, were becoming richer and richer. I heard someone talking about profiteering, huge profit margins by the so-called traders or middlemen. So when we identified that problem, we thought we should do something. And in doing something, we first of all created a very specific unit in the Commercial Competition Commission called the Research Unit. And under that research unit, we identified a project or a study called the African Market Observatory, which we are doing jointly with the Center for Competition, Regulation and Economic Development of the University of Johannesburg. And we focused on commodities commodities, let me just use that term. That were of importance to a number of our member states, because we have 21 member states. So we need to focus on that, which will have an impact at least to almost all of them. So we came to focus on vegetable oil and also the fertilizer markets. Well, we did realize that the fertilizer was very important in the production of food, and ultimately it results in prices for consumer products. And when we focused on that, a number of issues were arising. First of all, Teresa talked about the remarkable market concentration in some of these markets. I agree with that, especially in our markets in COMESA, in our 21 member states. We have very few traders. Those traders are seriously and significantly vertically integrated, and making the concentration itself being entrenched because of that vertical concentration. And as a result of that vertical integration along this value chain by a few of these companies, what we have seen is that they are giving a low price to the small-scale farmer, and then getting huge margins as they sell the product, especially to those that are involved in food processing. I'll give an example. In one of our interventions in this same research, we came to realize that, for example, some farmers some animal feed producers in Kenya had to close down their companies, okay, because the price at which they were buying the input, which may be maize grain or soy grain, was simply too high, and they could not survive, and they closed down. And when they close down, what happens is at that level as well, you remain with few, and it ultimately results in high prices for animal feed, for animal products, poultry products, and the like. So when we identify those issues, because Kenya is part of this market observatory, one of our member states, we're glad that Kenya took it up and localized the research in their country to identify these issues more and then act on that. Finally, since I'm trying to summarize, after this market observatory, what is it that we intend to do? I have a few issues here. First of all, we've also identified anti-competitive government policies. Teresa talked about that, and she said even in Europe, those things are happening. And it's a bit sad to hear that those things are also happening in Europe, because here they are a common issue. Governments restricting exports, governments restricting imports. Zambia has a bumper harvest of maize. It restricts its exports of that maize to Kenya, which has a deficit because of droughts and the like. Kenya equally restricts imports, even if it has deficits. And what has that caused? It has caused the skyrocketing prices for maize grain in Kenya with snowball effects, because this maize grain is used in the production of animal feed, also production of human feed. Animal feed becomes expensive. The ultimate product is also expensive. So anti-competitive government policies, what does it do in the case of Zambia, for example? It simply depresses the price more for the small-scale farmer, who doesn't then have an incentive to engage in maize production the next year. And as a result, there can be a vicious cycle, because next year, then there's a shortage or deficit in Zambia. Information asymmetry is another thing that we have observed, that the integrated multinationals are quite very organized. They have the capacity to have all the information as they wish. The small-scale farmers, no. The consumers themselves, no. So there's lots of information asymmetry. And to address this, we are saying we are engaging actively in awareness for both consumers, but also small-scale producers. And in that awareness, we are telling them to look out for issues that are anti-competitive or indeed cross-consumer violations. Advocacy, we are advocating now, engaging in advocacy programs with governments of our member states. We are planning to have one in January or February next year, where we are inviting ministers of trade, but also ministers of agriculture, to show them some of the issues that the policies that they are implementing, the negative effects that it's having. Mergers. Someone spoke about mergers. We've observed here, and we are taking a very serious introspection as COMESA. We've observed that previously there were small mergers that were taking place, and we are approving them, not seemingly not looking anti-competitive. But later on, we discovered that these were creeping mergers which have ended up creating monopolies. We are not so worried about monopolies. It's not wrong to be a monopolist, but then the behavior that we are seeing is something that is worrying. So we are saying we'll be conducting post-merger reviews and see if there's anything that we can do, especially that in some instances, we also discovered that these guys involved in the agri sector, these companies, some of them were giving us misleading information when they were notifying for major approvals, in that they were not giving us the relationships that they already had with some of the other players in the same sector. So we are reviewing that with possible punishments to those companies. And then
I think we just need to move on to our next panelist, so we have time to hear from everybody, but really keen to hear more as we get to that open discussion at the end and some final comments.
Thank you, Charlie. So finally, that's in less than 30 seconds. We've also created what we call a COMESA research platform. So COMESA research platform includes researchers from all the national competition authorities, and these issues are discussed and identified there. And then COMESA restrictive business practices networks. What comes from the research, if it calls for enforcement, then it is implemented at the COMESA restrictive business practice network. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Really valuable to hear there, a practical example of addressing these challenges and thinking about working with multiple governments on how to address this. We're going to move now to some of our remaining panelists here in the room. Really looking forward to building on some of these comments and to exploring some alternative angles and questions related to this question of unfair food prices. We'll go next to Shamali Gutal, Executive Director of Focus on the Global South, an activist think tank based in Thailand focused on building alternatives for just social, economic and political change. Shalmali is also a member of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, IPES Food, which has produced a number of really valuable reports highlighting the role of commodity speculation and market concentration, among other things, in driving up food prices. Shalmali, based on that work, what do you see as the key actions needed to tackle some of these challenges?
Thank you, Charlie, and hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to join this panel. I'll share with you some of the findings from the work that we've done in my own organization, Focus on the Global South, IPES Food, and also I recently conducted a report on monitoring food price volatility by the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that, you know, the challenges that we're talking about, they are structural and they demand systemic structural change, not tinkering. You know, you can't do wire tinkering with the global financial and economic system. There are fundamental changes that need to be made, and it's time to make them, really. And in May 2022, we released a report called Another Perfect Storm by IPES Food. And in this, we identified 4 fundamental weaknesses or flaws in food systems that are driving the global food security crisis. Now, these are weaknesses that are long-standing. And these are not new. They're not just triggered by one crisis or the other, but they have just been exposed by the recurring financial crisis, by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ukraine invasion, and climate change. And they will continue to happen unless we actually make those changes. And these 4 weaknesses, flaws that we call them, one is, of course, food import dependencies that many people have talked about. Then second, it's entrenched industrial production systems focused on export commodities, that are dependent also on fertilizer and long supply chains, and also global markets, which are highly concentrated at every level and at multiple, shall we say, segments of the chains, and over which consumers and even governments have almost very little control over. Third is opaque and dysfunctional grain markets. And fourth is vicious cycles of conflict, climate change, poverty, and hunger. And I think I need to provide no examples. If we look at the world today, we can see all this very clearly. Particularly in relation to opaque and dysfunctional markets and weaknesses, these are very important and often overlooked as part of the problem. If you look at the 2022 price, the price spikes, they were worsened very clearly by financial speculation and profiteering. We saw very clearly the increase in the number and percentage of speculators in futures markets. We saw a huge influx of investments into exchange traded funds, ETFs, which are volatile throughout the day and on a day-to-day basis. Of course, record profits for Cargill, ADM, and other grain traders in 2022. And these companies do not disclose their grain stocks, which undermine transparency on global grain reserves and also fuel the speculation from which they can profit. Fertilizer firms, interestingly, faced higher production costs in 2022, but they hiked their prices well beyond that. So they increased their operating profits to 36% in 2022 compared to 13% average, posted earlier. So even with higher production costs, they were recording higher profits. Now, of course, we've seen a lot of research done by various organizations in the world, including Oxfam, but also so many others, that show that food, energy, and pharmaceutical corporations have been posting record high profits, even as wages have barely budged and workers continue to struggle with high prices and food, and cost of living crises. Now, these cost of living crises are actually life crises. It's not just a question of cost of living going up or down. It matters because it matters in terms of the kind of acute and chronic conditions of well-being and unwell-being that they produce. But it's important to remember that these sectors are also sectors which are highly concentrated. The profits that are made by corporations enable them to concentrate these sectors further. And earlier this year, IPES Food also published a report called Who's Tipping the Scales, in which we raised alarm about the new ways in which corporations are concentrating power all along the all along the supply chain, from production to distribution, but also expanding their influence in global governance. I won't go into the details of that, but you can also find that on our website. Now, let me just quickly go into I have 3 minutes left, I see. I'm timing myself. So let me go into what we think are important based on, on the work of the three entities that I mentioned earlier. So to achieve fair food prices and rebuild food security, I think we need to take a number of interconnected actions. So the first one, they're not necessarily in order of priority. I'm just naming them 1, 2, 3, but they're all equally important and connected. We need to tax the windfall profits by agribusinesses and by other corporations and reinvest those funds in food security, food sovereignty, and building climate resilient food systems. Secondly, we need to break up agribusiness monopolies through stronger oversight, mergers, through maybe different competition policies, national regulatory policies. We need to legally regulate the power of agribusiness. We need to overturn their concentration of private grain reserves, and instead public food reserves must be supported to protect people from shocks. And related to this, we also, I'd just like to remind everybody again of the findings that, our findings from Who's Tipping the Scales report by IPES Food. Because if we want to dismantle the power of agribusiness corporations, there's a number of actions that need to be taken specifically to that too. So for example, creating mechanisms to manage conflicts of interest, creating measures to reduce the market power of corporations. We need to develop stricter rules on lobbying, spending, campaign financing, transparency reporting. We need to counter the shaping of science and policy discourse by large corporations. And we need to develop a UN-wide corporate accountability framework that can hold corporations accountable for human rights violations and environmental destruction. Then we need to crack down on and end financial speculation. Finance capital has become monstrous and it must be regulated, not only in the food and agriculture, but in all sectors, so that we can curb price volatility, because price volatility in one sector is going to infect another sector and so on. I think I don't need to go into the details. Then we need to break food and fertilizer import dependency, which many of the earlier speakers have already talked about. We need to support domestic food provisioning through rebuilding food production, distribution food production and distribution in low-income countries. And this shift then also requires financial assistance, debt relief, building and strengthening public procurement of food from small-scale food producers, and also the support of territorial markets to make locally healthy, nutritious foods available at affordable prices, create employment, and also retain economic value in the territories where the food is being produced and distributed. Debt cancellation for low and middle income countries, where private creditors are also on the table, is extremely important, so that countries have the resources then to build domestic social protection, food and health infrastructure, and protect people from price volatility. And then we need to reform and rejig the global, regional, and trade investment regimes. They must be reformed completely to serve the public rather than corporate interest. They must be redesigned to build domestic food reserves, shorten food supply chains, and also break corporate monopolies, because these trade investment agreements are also very enabling to corporations in terms of allowing them to concentrate power. And then finally, we need to transform food systems at every level through food sovereignty and agroecology. These are not just sort of apple pie, mom and pop kind of things that are good for everybody, but these actually require regulatory policy frameworks to phase out input-dependent fossil fuel-based agricultural systems, including the ban of highly hazardous pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, which affect not only the food that people eat, but also affect the workers who are then working in the fields and then subsequently handling these foods. Why don't I stop here and then I can take more questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amalia. Really, really valuable intervention again there, capturing so many of those really relevant issues. Definitely would encourage anyone who hasn't to look again at some of those reports that do share some really valuable learnings there. Our next speaker I think there's some alignment, but we'll share an alternative perspective as well on this question of fair food prices. Pascal Liu is a senior economist at the FAO Markets and Trade Division here in Rome, and the team leader on responsible global value chains. Pascal, ensuring the fair distribution of value throughout agri-food supply chains clearly requires a significant shift in business practices, as we've just heard. Could you share with us a summary of some of the key actions and policies that FAO recommends to help achieve this?
It will be difficult in just 5 minutes to summarize the recommendations of FAO, but is it okay? Can you hear well? Put it closer. Is it better this way?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, so yes, thank you very much for taking this great initiative for organizing this side event on fair food prices. Fair food prices is a very difficult and complex concept to define. You know, fairness, as we know, is a very subjective concept also. And depending on whose perspective you take, you know, fairness may have very different meanings, and fair food prices have very different meanings. If you put yourself in the shoes of a producer, fair food prices means high prices, okay? That would enable them to recoup their investments, cover their costs, and feed their families. If you put yourself in the shoes or from the perspective of consumers, fair food prices are low prices. So that's, I think, a very interesting and complex discussion. Unfortunately, we don't have time to discuss it today, but certainly it would deserve much more time. So there are many reasons, I think, for the current problems with food prices. And a lot of them have been mentioned by Teresa, Shalmali, Laura, and also Simon, not yet Salma, but I'm sure she will touch upon that in their speeches. And I think we know there are distortions along value chains, which are caused by imperfect competition, market power, in some cases, technical barriers to trade, oligopoly. I wouldn't go as far as talking about monopoly, but certainly there are some oligopolies in international food chains. And also incomplete information of stakeholders along the chain. So yeah, we won't go into all the details for these problems, but I think what's interesting is try to answer what is needed in terms of policies and mechanisms to have fairer food prices. Certainly we need fair policies to have fair food prices, fair policies on various fronts, on support to domestic producers to create a level playing field between advanced economies and middle and low income economies. Also fair trading policies, that's very important. For example, reducing export subsidies, reducing tariff escalation. Our colleague from COMESA mentioned, you know, the fact that for more processed products, tariffs tend to be higher. So this is also an issue because it tends to discriminate against, you know, discourage value adding in low-income countries on food products. Also trying to regulate and eliminate unjustified technical barriers to trade. Fair also sustainability policies and fair competition policies. Policies should prevent unfair trading practices in business-to-business relationships along value chains, food value chains. FAO is preparing a policy brief on this topic of unfair trading policies and the different legislative initiatives that are being taken to try to regulate them. Also, beyond policies, I think it's very important to increase transparency of markets and trade, and that was also mentioned by one of the panelists before me. We need more transparent markets and trade so that value chain actors are empowered. They have the information to be able, you know, to take action and to take the right action, having the right information. We need to provide reliable information on supply and demand and projected supply and demand of foods, and also to facilitate dialogue and exchange of information between exporting countries and importing countries. And I think an interesting example of such forum is the AMIS, the Agricultural Market Information System, that FAO facilitates based on an initiative taken by the G20 group of largest economies. Now, to get more in detail into this topic of fair value chains and what can be done, you know, in terms of agricultural supply chains to try to have fairer food prices, we need to aim for a fair distribution of value along agri-food supply chains. A greater share of the final product price should trickle down to farmers and workers. I think the example that we heard that only 0.5% of the final price paid in London for a product goes back to the farmer who produced that product is quite shocking. And unfortunately, it's not an exception. An exception. It's very rare that farmers get more than 10% of the final price paid in the consuming country. So we need to have mechanisms and policies to ensure better price transmission along the chain, from the downstream part of the chain, the importing country, the retail market, down to the producers, often in developing countries. And also we need to ensure that there's responsible business conduct, responsible business practices are followed and adhered to throughout the agricultural food chains. Because we know that responsible business conduct practices and due diligence can actually contribute to better livelihoods for farmers and for farm workers. So it's important to reduce the negative impacts that global value chains for food may have on farm workers and farmers, especially small farmers. And in this respect, policies and guidelines and standards for responsible business conduct and risk-based due diligence can lead to higher farm gate prices and also higher wages for farm workers. So that would benefit sustainable local economic development. In this respect, FAO and the OECD have joined force. In 2016, they released the OECD FAO Guidance for Responsible Agricultural Supply Chains, which is a voluntary standard for companies mainly that they can take up. They have it proposes a model policy and also a 5-step framework for risk-based due diligence to ensure that the company's activities throughout their supply chains do not have negative impacts on farmers, the environment, local communities, and farm workers. And now a rising number of countries, especially in the global north, are taking action to incorporate some of the recommendations of the OECD FAO guidance into their policies on due diligence requirements for their companies, the companies based in their territories, but also the suppliers of these companies. So in addition to policies, we also need more multi-stakeholder collaboration along agri-food supply chains. And on this topic, I would like to highlight a specific example, which is the World Banana Forum, which is a global multi-stakeholder platform of the banana sector. And it has a working group, multi-stakeholder working group, on the distribution of value along the chain, which analyzes the distribution of costs, prices, margins along the chain, which is of course a very challenging task because there's not so much data available. It also works on living wages for workers and living incomes for farmers, which can be attained if the prices paid for the bananas at farm gates are sufficient. So it's also a way of working on remunerative prices at farm gate. And it also promotes the concept of shared responsibility along the value chain, which is a very important concept that says that the responsibility for sustainable production and trade, for protecting the environment, local community, workers' health, farmers' incomes and their families, that should not be borne only by the producers, who often, in the case of bananas, are in tropical countries, they are in low and middle income countries, but it should be shared, this cost should be shared and borne by the whole supply chain, also by retailers, by importers, by processors, by exporters, etc., etc. So the working group facilitates international discussions and multi-stakeholder discussions on this topic of shared responsibility. It held several events recently, including in very large trade fairs for fresh fruits. And I think I will stop here. I'm within my 5 minutes, and maybe you can come back to some other aspects later on. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Pascal. Again, a really valuable alternative perspective there, and adding to this long list of solutions we're building. Definitely, as you mentioned, and as we all know, some of them easier said than done, but definitely great to be putting these on the agenda and starting to build momentum to act on this. So our final panelist, before we open up for comments and questions, is Saima Zahia. Thanks again for joining, Saima. Saima is from the Pakistan Kisan Rabita Committee, a network of small-scale farmers and peasants fighting for food sovereignty in Pakistan, which is also part of the global movement La Via Campesina. Saima is also joining us in particular as a member of the Coordination Committee of the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism, the official representative of civil society and indigenous groups here at the CFS. Simon, this issue of unfair food prices has been highlighted by the CSIPM all throughout the CFS session, especially at yesterday's plenary discussion on price volatility. From that perspective of farmer organizations working in that context, what are the actions being recommended at CFS and beyond to solve this challenge?
Thank you, Charlie. Am I audible? Is it okay? Okay. Great. So I can continue. Little bit closer. Okay. Is it okay now? Okay. I can hear myself very clearly. Thank you so much. So many things have been said. My friends, they already talked about the thing. I will try to summarize here, like what we are trying to do as a CSIPM through the CFS for the policy makings and decisions. First of all, the thing is like, as we talked about the fair price and the food, so then we need to recognize the structure of nature of the food crisis is multidimensional. When we talk about the fair prices of food and the food is like we can see that there's so many dimensions, so many regions, so many different type of fair price is maybe not fair for another country, and this can be the fair price for some countries. And because the hold of some companies, some big companies, they are making this crisis a bit worse. And also the thing is like the small scale holder farmers, they are growing the crops which have been they have been told to by the companies like, okay, we want this crop, so you need to go for this. So most of the farmers, they are running for the cash crops, which can be give them the money. And we are neglecting our indigenous foods, our forgotten foods, which need to be there and which can be which has been consumed by centuries by the local people in different countries. So the thing is like we should acknowledge what the current food crisis is not simply the result of this supply chain, and not only the distribution of the climate change, but is also caused by the systematic inequalities and injustice in the global food system, which has been prevailed very deep now, sadly. And the other thing is, which is very much important, is like we need to put people in the center of the food system, not the companies, not money, not the profit. We need to think about the people. The farmers, there's fisheries who are losing their livelihood because of these big companies. Like I have been witnessed in my country, the fisheries there, because now the big companies, they are allowed to go for fishing. They have like, they can, they just swiped out all the fish from the sea. And when early morning, the small fishermen, they are going, there is no fish in the sea. So they are coming back. This is their livelihood. They cannot do anything else because they learn it from now they depend on it. So we need to make sure that we make the people's right who are related to these food systems, who are the key of this food system. We need to make them and put them first. And we should also prioritize the need of small-scale farmers, fisher folks, and indigenous people. And we need to make sure they should be involved in all type of decision-making processes, which are happening around the food systems. And sadly, the thing is like what we are trying to do is as a CSIPM, because I'm also representing small farmers constituency in the CSIPM. And we are, as a CSIPM, we are trying to do and push these things through CSF in the food policies. And the next thing is like, as my friend Shalmali already talked about it, that it has been like, we need to promote the agroecological and sustainable food production systems, which will be cause like less expenditure for the small scale farmers. and they can sell their food at reasonable price. Because when your agri input cost will be high, it will be difficult for you to sell the food at the low price. But mostly the companies, they are buying from the at very low price from the farmers, and they are selling at the very high price. And the other side, the consumers, they are also affecting. And in the consumers, there are also people who are not growing the food, but they are taking the food. There are workers, there are women, there are informal sector workers who are not growing the food, where they are working in the factories, but they are daily wagers. And they are consuming the food, and they are getting this food at very high price. And we need to understand this, that if the purchasing power, the people, the consumer, they will lose the purchasing power, where we will sell this food. If we are continuously raising the prices, what will be the result? So that is also another side we need to learn about that. And the other thing is, like, obviously, we are trying to do, like, the CFS should support policies that promote agroecology and other sustainable food production practices that can help to reduce poverty and hunger, while also protecting the environment. That's also very important. Okay, I'm trying to do it very quickly, sorry. Okay, Charlie is just telling me, but sorry, it's like, and we also need to regulate the corporate food system. That already I talked about it because they are exploiting the small fisheries and farmers. And we also need to increase the public investment in the food system. We need to do more research on that. We need to strengthen the farmer organizations. This is the thing, like, if the farmer organizations, they will be strong, they will be there in the policy making processes, they can improve their bargaining systems, bargaining power, and they can also make it easy for the farmers to reach on the new technologies and how they can transform their agriculture on the agricultural system. And also through the CFS, we are very much focusing on multilateralism, because multi-stakeholderism is like the kind of thing, like, we cannot make accountable anybody in this system. So states and governments should be responsible for everything. They should be accountable, because we are waiting for the governments. We are not voting for the companies. So there are so many other things to say, but Charlie is continuously looking at me, and sorry for that. Okay, so I'm finishing this right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you under pressure there, but yeah, all really valuable stuff. And definitely keen to hear more. So we do have a bit of time for interventions. We've got a lot of questions from the chat, from our online participants, so we'll be happy to hear from them. But I think first, let's give people in the room a chance to intervene as well. And we've got someone over here, if you're happy to go first. There's a microphone at the back coming around. Again, ask you to keep it brief if possible, kind of 1 minute as the aim. Question or quick comment, and then our speakers can build these into their comments at the end.
Hi, thank you so much for the panel and your remarks today. My name is Janice Giddens, and I'm with the Private Sector Mechanism and the U.S. Dairy Export Council. So my question is for Mr. Liu. You are really intensively involved in the Principles for Responsible Agriculture Investment with EFAD, UNCTAD, World Bank, and the CFS principles too. So I'm just curious, as we're addressing multi-stakeholder involvement here, what's your suggestions on working with private sector?
Great, thank you. I think we'll go through a few questions and then come back. There was a question at the front here. Well, yeah, it's in the front over here, please. Thank you.
I just want to do a comment. My name is Alexandro. I'm here representing Federal Council of Nutritionists from Brazil. As Shamala and Simon addressed in their speech, I think the big problem today of the food prices is the mode of production. It must be a structural change in the way of production. There is no point in guarantee access to fertilizers and seeds with genetic modification. We have to think about the paradigm shift. returning, improving agroecological production, which is social fair, responsible, and guarantees sovereignty. So we have to encourage government to improve it, agroecological production. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I have a question over in this corner over here as well.
Charlie.
Hi, let's just go through questions in the room first, and then yeah, definitely we can factor in some from online as well.
Hi, thank you so much for the insightful discussion. Just a quick question. I'm just wondering, to what extent are small-scale producers creating associations or cooperatives currently? And to what extent can that enable them to earn a seat at the table, have more bargaining power in the discussion about fair food prices?
Great, thank you. And then a few questions we have coming in from throughout the chat, from throughout the session, from this chat on the online session. I'll just highlight some of these, and I think any of our speakers in their kind of next final comments can address these where possible, bring through some reactions to these. With a question about the role of living wages as a solution that governments can be addressing. How effective can this be in delivering fairer prices for producers and consumers? We had a question about the role that consumer advocates, consumer organizations can play in strengthening action against unfair food prices. We had a question about data as a barrier to taking action, especially in the global south, either at farm gate or consumer level. How do we need to strengthen data systems and data availability on food prices to take action here? And then a question about how do we get ministers of agriculture and economy to pay more attention to competition concerns and this question of market concentration. So I think these, in addition to some of the questions we heard on the role of business action, what action businesses can take, how do we deliver this agroecological paradigm shift, and the role of cooperatives in delivering this change. Is anyone keen to go first in answering some of these? Everyone, seems like. Yeah, Saima, you keen to go first? Just reactions to these, yeah. Just keeping it quick, 1 minute if possible, thank you.
About the small farmer organizations, sorry, I totally forgot the questions, but I just the thing is, when we talk about the small scale farmers, because it's very important for them to be organized. To be organized in the form of the organizations, whether we are not talking about their legal status. They are registered or not registered, that doesn't matter. But they should be organized themselves in the form of cooperatives or in the form of organizations. So they collectively, they can bargain, they can talk with the government, with the UN, with the CFS, with all the agencies who are responsible for the food policies around the world. Because like my country in Pakistan, it's very backward country. I don't want to use the word backward, but it's like you can see the smallholders, they don't know what is happening here. I'm from the area which is a small town. When I will go back, I will tell them, and they would not believe it. Because they said that they are just doing the things at regular. So we need to make them organize. We need to tell them about the new technologies, what is happening in the food systems, new researches, and all this they can get is it only on the way if they will be organized themselves in the small farmer organizations. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Simon. Perfect. Yeah, so just a reminder. We heard about living wages, data, consumer advocates, reaching agriculture ministers, business action, paradigm shifts, and the role of cooperatives. Let's move back down the way we came. If Pascal, you'd happy to go next. That was a question directly to you, so maybe having that one first. But any other thoughts, welcome. The question on the role of businesses, and yeah.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I do think that businesses have a very important role to play in ensuring that responsible investment is done in agriculture and food systems, and also that throughout the agri-food value chains, there's responsible business conduct and fair treatment of all value chain operators. Regarding the CFS RAI, the principles for responsible in agriculture and the food systems, it was very interesting because we, together with the World Bank, IFAD and UNCTAD, we decided to do some kind of pilot testing of these principles back in 2010, 2014, more or less. That was the length of this experiment. It was at that time called it was not yet the CFS RAI, it was the PRI. It was a series of principles that had been designed by the 4 organizations that I just mentioned. And it was very interesting because we would work with investors, but also local community organizations in various African countries to see how these principles, which are kind of high level principles, could be actually fitted and suited to the reality of the field in rural areas of Africa. We published a series of studies that are available on the FAO website, case studies. And then there was the RAI, the CFS RAI, where the private sector mechanism had a role as the civil society mechanism during the development of these principles, and then negotiations at the CFS, I remember well, between 2012 and 2014, until the CFS RAI principles were endorsed. Following that, FAO implemented various activities and projects on responsible investment. And here I have the pleasure to introduce my colleague, Michael Ricks, who was at that time, leading these activities and some practical projects in various countries on CFS RAI, and so he could certainly, provide more information. And also beyond the RAI, regarding the OECD FAO guidance for responsible agricultural supply chains that I mentioned, they were also discussed within a multi-stakeholder group, an advisory group, between 2013 and 2016 until they were released, in which the private sector was represented. So we had also a kind of ongoing dialogues with companies through their mechanism, which is at the OECD, because it was jointly done with the OECD.
Thanks, Pascal. I think we should move on so we have time for everybody, but it sounds like a good conversation that can continue afterwards. Shamali, any of those questions in particular you'd like to pick up on? Your final
Well, my closing remark here would be that we really need to tackle the issue of corporate concentration along the entire supply chain, all the way, and in fact, even before the supply chain begins. So for example, in terms of control over land, access to territories and resources, water, all the way to consumption, labeling, marketing, so the entire, so pre to post, right? And why do I say this? Because I think market concentration is one of our biggest structural challenges in terms of assuring sustainably produced, safe, healthy foods that are locally, that are local foods that sort of respond to local food systems and that are accessible to everybody, not only to the elite. There's a huge market in organics now in many countries, but who eats those organics? Whereas you actually go to, if you go to the places where the food workers are working, or you go to the place where the apples are being picked, or you see how the agricultural workers are living, they are living on dirt poor wages and eating the most unhealthy food. And I know there's always a quibble about statistics as to, what is the accurate number of how much food is produced by small-scale food producers and so on. I'm not even going to go into that, but I think if people look honestly at all our societies, especially in the global south, we will see that a significant amount of food is being produced by small-scale food producers and workers, and majority of the poor, majority of low-income communities are fed by small-scale food production, localized food production. So investing in those systems are absolutely essential, in order to get fair food prices. And a big part of this, of course, is living wages, not just decent wages, but living wages. And living wages are difficult to get to when you have corporate oligopolies. I agree, maybe we don't have so many monopolies, but we certainly have oligopolies and huge amount of corporate concentration. So these are structural things that are connected to each other. So I would argue very strongly for for very strong policy measures, legal regulation of corporations, and legal measures at all aspects of governance, from national to global levels, to stop financial speculation, especially in food, and to break down these monopolies and to shift, resources and support from industrial food production systems to agroecology and small-scale food production. Thank you.
Very clear, very compelling. Thank you, Shamali. Laura, keeping it quick, any final thoughts?
Yes, very, very short. I do think some of the issues were very well raised, no? But I wish to underline, okay, the solution of the normal challenges will come throughout market transparency, information, regulatory measures, and so on. But the promotion of local markets, and especially what Salmali was saying, if we invest in sustainable increasing of local production by small-scale farmers, linked to healthy and affordable diets, is key in this solution that we are looking for. No, so we are not only need to afford or to address the imbalance in the value chains. We need to invest in small-scale farmers, in agroecological models. We have climate change impacting the production, and we need to ensure that family farmers and small-scale farmers, who are at the same time the poorest ones, are able to increase a little bit their production and to feed the local markets. No, that is my final conclusion.
Great, thank you, Laura. I see Teresa has her hand up as well on the Zoom. If you'd like to, again, keeping it very quick, 30 seconds, 1 minute, final comment, please.
Thank you very much. No, I just wanted to mention that indeed what we see is that there is a need for a combination of different public policies, some with more, I would say, immediate effect, others which rely more on medium-term, long-term developments, regarding the economic diversification, so the regional supply chains, etc. But I wanted to say that, of course, competition and consumer policies are extremely important, but also to underline that in any case, competition policy is based usually on an ex-post intervention in case of anti-competitive conduct. And through merger control, yes, some mergers are forbidden, but the majority of mergers being notified across the world are actually authorized. And several are authorized with what we call remedies, so with commitments that could include structural measures, for instance, divestiture of assets, or behavioral measures. So I think it has to be, when we think about the action against big corporations, etc., one needs to be realistic, because you still need to have a legal framework or a regulatory framework to act. And this is what I wanted to say about public policies. And that, of course, what Pascal mentioned, we are all for a multi-stakeholder approach. I mentioned that the UN guidelines for consumer protection include good business practice recommendations. And we have seen this throughout the climate change issues, so the proliferation of voluntary sustainability standards. I mean, in each of them, they are not necessarily the full answer to the challenge, but they are very useful contributions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Teresa. I think we might have lost Dr. Mwemba, but we're really out of time anyway, running over. Apologies. So I think we'll wrap it up there, but really some really valuable comments from everybody. I think really good that this has been on the CFS agenda, keen for it to be more so next year, and really in all of these other fora as well. Such a relevant issue, not just for food security, but for nutrition, for sustainability, a lot of the factors driving climate crisis, the same challenge of our over-concentrated food systems. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to all of our audience for joining, both online and in person. Our CFS hosts and team of interpreters, sorry for keeping you a little longer than intended. And of course, to all of our panelists. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you to everyone.
Bye. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Charlie. We need more of such discourses.
Sure, we will.